It was a gray-skied Tuesday, the kind of dreary afternoon that made hot coffee and comfort food feel like salvation. Lucy Ward wiped her hands on her apron as she moved briskly between tables at Marlowe's Diner, a tiny, time-worn place nestled off Route 22 in a southern town most folks drove through, not to. The lunch crowd was thinning, just a couple of regulars chewing the fat at the counter, and a pair of tired truckers nursing their coffee refills. Lucy sighed with a familiar rhythm. She loved the place, even if it was far from glamorous. The cracked linoleum floors, vintage jukebox, and mismatched mugs gave it character. Her regulars gave it soul. The bell above the door jingled. Lucy looked up and saw a tall older man step inside. He was black, with deep-set eyes that carried stories no one had probably asked to hear in years. His boots were scuffed, his jacket a faded army green. The insignia on his sleeve was barely visible, worn down by time and hard living. He paused by the door, glanced around as if considering turning back, then slowly shuffled toward a booth in the corner, furthest from the windows, nearest to the heater. Lucy approached with a practiced smile. "Afternoon? Coffee?" He nodded. His voice was low, steady. "Yes, ma'am, just coffee. And, you still got that chicken pot pie?" She nodded. "Sure do. Comes with a roll and coleslaw." He gave her the smallest of smiles, and she turned to place the order. As she walked away, she noticed him subtly checking his coat pockets, fingers brushing through a worn wallet. The kind of movement someone made when mentally counting change. Lucy's heart twinged. She'd seen that look before. More than once. She didn't think twice. When the food was ready, she delivered it with a fresh pour of coffee, then kept an eye on him from behind the counter. He ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was the best meal he'd had in months. Maybe it was. When he reached for the check, Lucy was already there. She scooped it up before he could touch it. "Don't worry about it," she said softly. "It's taken care of." The man looked up at her, startled. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," she replied. "Thank you for your service." There was a pause, and his eyes filled, just for a second, with something that looked like disbelief. Then something warmer. "My name's Lucy," she added. He gave a slow nod. "David. David Owens." Back in the kitchen, Lucy leaned on the counter, letting out a long sigh as she refilled the sugar jars. The diner had settled into a gentle lull, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of cutlery. Carla, her fellow waitress and partner in snark, leaned against the prep counter with a knowing look in her eyes. "You bought that guy's lunch?" Carla asked, popping a gum bubble and cocking her head sideways. Lucy nodded without looking up. "Yeah." "You even know him?" "Nope." Carla raised her brows. "You do realize we don't get paid enough to be Mother Teresa, right?" Lucy gave a soft laugh and shook her head. "He looked like he needed a break, and I had the $5. Carla whistled and walked over to grab a pot of coffee. "Well, if a gold star ever falls from the sky, I'll be sure to pin it on your apron." But Lucy wasn't listening. Her mind lingered on the man, David Owens. There had been something in his eyes, not just weariness, but sorrow, a sorrow that went down to the bone. He'd eaten like he hadn't had a real meal in days, and yet his manners remained intact, dignified, disciplined. He hadn't asked for pity, just coffee and pie. The next morning started like every other in Lucy's little world. Her alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., pulling her from dreams she wouldn't remember. She slid out of bed, tugged on jeans and her maroon Marlowe's Diner polo, twisted her hair into a messy ponytail, and poured herself a cup of yesterday's coffee. Reheated, bitter, and dependable, just like most things in her life. She drove the winding road into town, her eyes still foggy with sleep. But as she turned onto Main Street, her brakes squealed. Parked directly across from the diner was a convoy of military vehicles. 6 of them. No mistaking the shape. Humvees, a transport truck, and what looked like a mobile command unit. Men in uniform stood at attention, crisp and still as statues. Lucy sat frozen in her driver's seat for a full 30 seconds, trying to compute what she was seeing. Her heart thumped as if it knew something she didn't. She pulled into the diner's lot slowly, unsure if she was driving into a parade or a war zone. As she stepped out of her car, the door of the lead vehicle opened, and a tall, clean-cut man in a decorated dress uniform stepped out. His boots hit the pavement like thunder. He crossed the street with purpose and removed his hat as he approached her. "Are you Lucy Ward?" he asked, voice steady and formal. Lucy blinked. "Yes, I am." He offered a salute. "Colonel Travis Boone, U.S. Army. I'm here on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs and the 82nd Airborne Division. Yesterday, you served lunch to Master Sergeant David Owens." She nodded slowly, more confused than ever. "I did. He didn't have enough. I just covered it." Colonel Boone's expression softened. "You may not realize it, but what you did changed the course of that man's life. David Owens disappeared from our system nearly 10 years ago. He was decorated, respected, then he vanished after retirement. We'd been trying to find him, and yesterday, because of you, he walked back into our world." Lucy's breath caught. I don't understand." "David said your kindness reminded him that not everyone forgot him, that someone still saw him, that someone still cared." Then the colonel stepped aside and gestured to the convoy. The back door of the lead vehicle opened. David Owens stepped out slowly, but this wasn't the same man Lucy had served yesterday. Today, he stood tall in full dress uniform, medals gleaming against the deep blue of his jacket. His posture was erect, his gaze forward. The slump in his shoulders was gone. Gasps echoed around them. A few early morning locales had gathered, drawn by the spectacle. Someone across the street had already started filming. David approached Lucy with steady steps. When he reached her, he paused, his eyes already glassy with emotion. "You didn't know me," he said, his voice hoarse but full. "But you saw me." Lucy's throat tightened. "I just thought, I don't know, you looked like you needed someone to care." David gave a short, grateful chuckle. "I did. And you did." He turned to the soldiers behind him and raised a hand. With precise coordination, the entire unit saluted her. Colonel Boone stepped forward again, holding a velvet-lined box. "Ms. Ward, on behalf of the United States Army and every soldier who's ever felt forgotten, we present you with the Civilian Commendation for Exceptional Compassion." He opened the box to reveal a polished silver medallion, engraved with an eagle, stars, and the words, "For service beyond the uniform." Lucy took a shaky breath. Her hands trembled as she accepted the medal. I don't know what to say." David smiled. "You already said it, when you covered my bill and thanked me for serving. That was more than anyone had said to me in a long, long time." Tears spilled freely down Lucy's cheeks, and she laughed through them. "I was just doing what felt right." "And sometimes," David said gently, "doing what feels right can save a life." The crowd applauded, softly at first, then stronger, with whistles and cheers. Even Carla peeked out the diner window, eyes wide. Lucy looked around at the convoy, the soldiers, the townspeople, and the man who stood before her with new light in his eyes. She had shown him a moment of kindness, and in return, he had shown her what it meant to matter. The diner buzzed for days after the convoy rolled through. By mid-afternoon, barely 24 hours after the military spectacle, Marlowe's diner was swarming. Reporters milled around with microphones, camera crews jostled for space, and curious onlookers snapped pictures of the building like it was a historic landmark. Local news anchors used phrases like "small-town miracle" and "random act of kindness that shook a nation." The headline practically wrote itself. "Waitress pays for veteran's meal. Next day, a convoy shows up." Inside, The atmosphere had shifted from sleepy morning routine to high-voltage chaos. Customers lined up out the door. Some wore military hats. Others clutched newspapers. All wanted to see her, Lucy Ward, the waitress with the golden heart. Lucy could barely hear herself think. She weaved through tables with her notepad clenched like a lifeline and a forced smile plastered to her face. Every table asked the same thing. "Are you the waitress? Can we take a photo with you?" "My daughter's in the Marines. Thank you for what you did." Even the governor's office had called. They wanted her at a veterans charity gala next month. And the mayor dropped off a certificate declaring April 3rd Lucy Ward Day in their county. Marty, the owner of the diner, kept peeking out of the kitchen in disbelief. "We're out of pot pie again. That's the third batch, Lucy. What the hell's going on? And should I raise prices?" Carla laughed so hard she choked on a pickle. But Lucy, she was overwhelmed. She hadn't done it for praise. Or for headlines. That $5 bill had come from her own pocket, sure. But it had also come from instinct. She hadn't seen a future media frenzy when she handed the check back to the veteran. All she'd seen was a tired man who needed a hot meal and a little dignity. That evening, after the crowd had thinned and the cameras disappeared with the setting sun, Lucy finally took a breath. She collapsed into the same red vinyl booth where David Owens had sat 2 days earlier. She cradled a cup of lukewarm coffee in both hands and watched the steam curl away like wisps of everything she couldn't process. Then, the bell above the front door jingled. She looked up, and there he was again. David Owens. No uniform this time, just a crisp button-down shirt tucked into jeans with a weathered leather jacket that looked a little too new. His face was softer now. The sharp edge of desperation she remembered was gone, replaced by something else. Gratitude, maybe. Grounding. "I figured I owed you a piece of pie," he said with a slight grin. Lucy blinked, then chuckled. "You don't owe me anything." He slid into the booth across from her. "I know, but I want to." They sat there in quiet comfort, surrounded by the scent of grilled onions and syrup-stained menus. The diner felt warmer somehow, like the heart of the town had cracked open just a little and let the light in. "I didn't expect all this," Lucy finally said, glancing toward the window where flashes from earlier camera bulbs still seemed to echo. "I did," David replied. She raised her brows. "Seriously?" He gave a slow nod. "Not the media, but I knew someone would see it. What you did, it wasn't just about the food. It was about acknowledgement." Lucy shifted uncomfortably. "It didn't feel like a big thing." David leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. "That's because you're a good person. Good people don't think twice about kindness. But for someone like me, who's felt invisible for years, it was monumental." She swallowed hard, throat tight. "You were never invisible." "You're the first person to say that in a long time," he said quietly. For a moment, the diner's buzz gave way to a peaceful hush, the kind of silence that lets hearts speak instead of mouths. Then David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He placed it gently on the table between them. "I was offered counseling, housing, and even a part-time position mentoring younger vets. But before I accepted anything, I wanted to give you this." Lucy opened the pouch slowly. Inside was a coin, military issue, heavy, polished. Its face bore the insignia of the 82nd Airborne Division and the Latin words "all the way." "A challenge coin?" she asked, surprised. David nodded. "This one was given to me by my CO after a mission in Kandahar. I've carried it ever since, through deployments, through dark nights, through years on the street. It reminded me who I was when I felt lost." Her hand trembled slightly as she touched it. "I want you to have it," he continued, voice steady, "because what you gave me was more than a meal. You reminded me that I matter, that I exist." Lucy's eyes shimmered. I don't know what to say." You don't have to say anything, he whispered. Then, gently, he curled her fingers over the coin. You already said it, with $5 and a smile. Outside, the last van packed up and pulled away. The night returned to normal. No cameras, no applause. Just a quiet corner of a humble diner and two lives stitched together by fate and compassion. Lucy looked down at the coin in her palm. Some acts of kindness ripple. Others roar like a convoy down Main Street. This one? It changed two lives forever. The next few weeks transformed Marlowe's Diner into more than just a roadside stop for bacon and eggs. It became a landmark of compassion. People came not just for the food, but for the story. The table where Lucy had served David his meal was now unofficially reserved as the veterans' booth, and regulars treated it with a reverence usually reserved for sacred spaces. Every day, Lucy tied her apron a little tighter and prepared for another flood of strangers. Tourists, reporters, veterans, and curious wanderers, each hoping to witness the place where kindness echoed loud enough to summon a military convoy. At first, it was overwhelming. Lucy had never craved attention. She liked her routines: early mornings, black coffee, the rhythm of plates clinking and order slips fluttering. Now every moment felt like a performance. Customers asked for selfies. Newspapers called her a hero. Bloggers and influencers wrote about the waitress who started a movement. But Lucy didn't feel like a hero. She still struggled to make rent, still counted change at the grocery store, still woke up some mornings with a knot of uncertainty in her chest. The world saw her as a beacon, but inside, she still felt like the same woman who barely scraped through Tuesdays. The only time she felt normal was when David visited. He didn't come in uniform anymore. He came in jeans, with quiet eyes, and an easy smile. They started having lunch together after her shift, and sometimes dinner too. When he wasn't helping other veterans at the VA, he was sitting across from her at a booth, talking about books, jazz, and what it meant to feel invisible, and then suddenly, seen. One quiet Sunday evening, they sat out on Lucy's small porch. She handed him a glass of sweet tea and leaned back in the old rocking chair she'd inherited from her grandmother. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of apricot and lavender. David took a slow sip and said, "You ever think about why you really paid for my meal?" Lucy didn't answer right away. She watched a pair of kids ride bikes down the street, laughing as their wheels clacked against the pavement. "I think I was tired of pretending not to see people," she said finally. "Tired of living in a world where we all keep our heads down and minds closed. That day, something in your face made me look up." He nodded. "You didn't just see me, you saw right through me." They sat in silence, the air between them gentle and weightless. The cicadas sang in the trees. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. After a moment, Lucy said, "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" David looked over. "Of course." She took a breath. "After my divorce, I spent months going through the motions. I'd wake up, go to work, serve tables, come home, rinse and repeat. But I felt hollow, like I was disappearing a little more every day." He listened without interruption. "That morning you walked in, I was thinking about quitting the diner. Maybe moving away. Starting over. But something about you, your silence, your sadness, made me pause. And in that tiny pause, something changed." David reached over and placed his hand gently on hers. "You saved me, Lucy." She blinked, her eyes glistening. "You saved me right back." A week later, the town council hosted a Veterans Appreciation Dinner at the local park. There were folding chairs and paper lanterns, barbecue smoke curling into the twilight, and a small stage with a podium surrounded by American flags. They asked Lucy to speak. At first, she refused. "I'm not good with speeches," she insisted, "and I don't like standing in front of people." But Carla nudged her. "You stood up when it counted. You've already said more with a smile than most people say with a microphone." "So," Lucy agreed. When her name was called, she stepped up to the stage under strings of twinkling lights. Her palms were sweaty, her voice trembled. but her heart beat steady. She scanned the crowd, veterans in uniform, families with kids, reporters, and townsfolk. David sat in the front row, hands folded, eyes steady. "I'm not a soldier," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I've never worn a uniform or held a rank. But I know what it feels like to be forgotten. I know what it feels like to wonder if anyone would notice if you disappeared." She paused. The crowd was utterly still. David walked into my diner, and I saw a man carrying the weight of silence. I didn't know his name, I didn't know his story, but I knew he deserved to be seen. Applause swelled. Lucy blinked back tears. This isn't about one meal or one moment. It's about choosing every day to see the people around us, to honor them, to make them feel like they matter. As she stepped down, people stood to clap. Some saluted. Others hugged her. It wasn't fanfare, it was connection. Later that night, as the crowd filtered out and the lanterns swayed in the breeze, a woman approached. She was in her 40s, neatly dressed, with weary eyes and a strong voice. "My son served," she said. "Ever since he came home, he hasn't been the same. Withdrawn, silent. But when he saw your story on the news, he looked at me and said, 'Maybe I'll go to that diner.'" Lucy swallowed hard. "Please bring him. We'll keep a seat open for him every day if we have to." The woman's eyes filled. She gripped Lucy's hand. "You're doing more than you know." Lucy stood there for a long time after everyone left, the stars blinking above her like distant witnesses. She had once felt so small, so invisible. Now, her act of kindness had echoed into corners she'd never imagined. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The fall rolled in with a chill that kissed the windows of Marlowe's diner each morning, frosting the glass just enough to fog the sunrise. Lucy had gotten used to the attention by now, though she still flushed when someone new asked for a picture or slid her a note with a shaky "thank you." By this point, she had hundreds of them. Notes from veterans, spouses, teenagers, strangers. Some were scribbled on napkins, others typed and signed with full names and serial numbers. They filled a shoebox under her bed, a personal time capsule of the ripple she had caused with a $12 meal and a gut feeling. David came by more often now. Not as a customer, not even as a veteran, but as something else. As someone who had woven himself into her life slowly, gently. He helped her fix up her porch, brought over groceries when she forgot, made her laugh even on tired Tuesdays. But more than anything, he listened. On one cool October afternoon, Lucy stepped outside after a long shift and found him waiting near the curb, leaning against his old Jeep with 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You spoil me," she teased, taking one. "I'm just paying my dues," he said, smiling. "Figured you deserved to be the one served for once." They walked slowly, side by side, letting the day wind down around them. Fallen leaves crunched underfoot. Somewhere a dog barked, and the scent of chimney smoke curled into the air like an old memory. "Did you ever imagine it would turn into this?" David asked. Lucy shook her head. "Not even close. I just thought you looked like you needed someone to see you that day. And maybe I needed to be someone who saw." He nodded. "I think you became that for a lot of people." They sat on a bench overlooking a small hill. Below them, kids played flag football, while parents cheered from the sidelines. The world, somehow, had kept spinning. "I talked to someone from the VA this week," David said. "They want to name a volunteer outreach program after you." Lucy blinked. "What? Why?" "Because it started with you, with one gesture that inspired hundreds. That kind of thing. It's rare." She stared ahead. "I'm just a waitress." "You're the waitress who turned a meal into a movement," he said gently. "Don't ever sell that short." Lucy didn't answer right away. She let the moment stretch, felt it settle over her like a warm quilt. There had been so many years when she thought her life would amount to little more than coffee refills and grease-stained aprons. Now she was part of something bigger than she'd ever dreamed. The next weekend, something unexpected happened. A military convoy returned, different from the first, but unmistakably connected. 3 Humvees, 1 press van, and a transport truck bearing the Department of Veterans Affairs logo. They pulled up mid-morning while the diner was halfway through its usual Saturday breakfast rush. People froze. Some stood. Others pulled out phones. But the soldiers who stepped out weren't here for a parade. They were here for breakfast. The officer in charge, a woman with crisp posture and steel gray hair, stepped forward and shook Lucy's hand. "We just wanted to stop by and thank you in person," she said, "for reminding the country what it means to honor our own." She handed Lucy a plaque, heavy, engraved, official, presented to Lucy Brennan for extraordinary civilian service and acts of quiet courage. Lucy swallowed hard. "I didn't expect this." The officer smiled. "The best heroes never do." The convoy stayed for an hour, eating, laughing, swapping stories. Before they left, a young soldier walked up to Lucy and held out a small envelope. "My dad was in town last month. He said you treated him like a person when he couldn't remember how to feel like one." She opened the envelope after they left. Inside was a handwritten note and a photo of the man, smiling, standing in front of the diner, with one hand over his heart. "Thank you for bringing my father home." Lucy pressed the photo to her chest, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Not everything broken stays broken. Sometimes it just needs to be seen. Later that evening, after the convoy had gone and the last crumbs of toast were cleared from tables, Lucy stood alone at the counter. The diner had quieted to a peaceful hum, the kind that comes only after the rush, when the chairs are stacked and the air smells like brewed coffee and faint maple syrup. Carla emerged from the back, wiping her hands on a towel. "I don't care what they say," she grinned. "I still think you should run for mayor." Lucy chuckled, shaking her head. "Please, I'd rather face a sink full of dirty dishes than city council meetings." "But think about it," Carla teased, leaning against the counter. "You've already done more for this town than most politicians. You've got heart, people trust you, and honestly, you're kind of famous now." Lucy rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Maybe there was a part of her that liked hearing it, just a little. She glanced over at the photos pinned to the bulletin board by the register. Some had been sent in by strangers from out of state. Others were pictures regulars had taken with her. And in the middle, now framed in a simple oak border, was the photo the young soldier had left that morning. The man's face reminded her of something, of fragility and resilience living side by side, of how close someone could get to fading away before being pulled back into focus by a single act of compassion. She walked over and touched the corner of the frame lightly, as if to say, "I see you still." As she turned back, she noticed an elderly couple quietly sliding into a booth by the window. They looked a little lost, a little unsure. The woman clutched a worn photo album. The man wore a military pin on his lapel. Lucy smiled and grabbed 2 menus. No matter how many articles were written or awards handed out, she knew her purpose hadn't changed. She was still the one who brought the coffee. She was still the one who saw people, really saw them. And tomorrow, she'd do it all over again. Because in her diner, no one stayed invisible for long. Winter arrived with a hush. Snow blanketed the streets in a soft, muffled silence, turning Marlowe's diner into a glowing beacon amid the gray. Inside, the scent of fresh biscuits mingled with rich coffee, and the gentle hum of the heater filled the air. The cold outside made everything inside feel cozier, warmer, like the diner itself was hugging the people who walked in. Lucy arrived earlier than usual. There was something sacred about mornings like this, before the clatter and rush, before the smells of bacon and scrambled eggs overtook the calm. She liked the quiet preparation, the peaceful routine of restocking napkins, warming syrup bottles, and brewing the first pot of coffee. She paused by the article on the wall. It had been laminated now, framed and mounted near the counter where she always worked. The headline still made her squirm. "Waitress sparks national movement with act of compassion." Sometimes she joked with Carla about it, saying it sounded like a Marvel origin story. But beneath the jokes, there was still disbelief. She'd never meant to make headlines. She'd simply followed an instinct, a quiet nudge in her chest, when she saw a hungry man who looked like he hadn't been treated with dignity in a long time. And maybe, just maybe, it had all started long before that. Lucy rarely talked about it, not even with David. But years ago, when she was 16 and sleeping on a friend's couch after her mother kicked her out, she'd wandered into a small diner not unlike Marlowe's. Cold, hungry, desperate. She'd stared at a menu she couldn't afford until a stranger, an older woman with kind eyes, quietly paid for her meal and left without a word. All she left behind was a note scribbled on a napkin. Kindness is never wasted. Lucy still kept it, folded in her wallet, yellowed and fragile. The memory gave her purpose now. The day she met David, she hadn't just paid for a meal. She'd kept a promise made years ago, even if she didn't realize it in the moment. The diner's front bell jingled. Carla came in, brushing snow off her coat. "You ready for the chaos today?" she asked with a smirk. Lucy blinked. "What chaos?" Carla grinned. "You didn't check the community board? The high school choir's coming. They wrote a song for you, something about the waitress who remembered." Lucy groaned and laughed all at once. "Why didn't you warn me?" "Because you'd try to skip town," Carla teased. "Besides, the governor's assistant called, said she might swing by." Lucy grabbed a coffee pot. "Do I at least get free pie?" "You get the whole pie." By lunchtime, the diner was bursting. Every seat was filled. Regulars sitting shoulder to shoulder with reporters, school kids, veterans in their caps, and families who had driven from neighboring counties just to be part of the moment. A local TV crew set up near the jukebox. The honor choir stood nervously in a semicircle beside the booths, their teacher giving them last-minute instructions. Then, with a nod, the room fell silent. The first notes of the song rang out, simple and heartfelt. Their voices carried lyrics about unseen heroes, quiet courage, and a woman who saw the soldier before she saw the man. There was something pure about the way they sang. Not for fame, not for praise, but out of genuine admiration. Lucy stood behind the counter, hands clasped in front of her, blinking back tears. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause. A few veterans stood and saluted. Then the principal stepped forward, holding a polished plaque. "Lucy Brennan," he said, voice steady. "You didn't ask for a thank you. You never sought recognition. But today, we give you something you can't refuse." He gestured to the wall beside the register, where a brass plate had been newly installed. Lucy's Corner, in honor of compassion that started a movement. Beneath it, they had mounted a collage. Photographs of veterans and their families, handwritten letters, patches from military uniforms, medals, and notes of gratitude from across the country. One letter was signed simply, "From one hungry soul you saved." Lucy stepped out from behind the counter and stood in front of the plaque. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled and cleared her throat. "Well," she said, "can I get anyone some coffee?" Laughter rippled through the diner like warmth from an oven. That night, when the crowds had left and the air was still, Lucy sat with David in their usual booth, their mugs steaming. "You know," he said, "most people don't get to see the ripples they make. But you started a wave." She looked around at the empty diner, the booths, the sign, the photos. The place didn't just feed people anymore. It fed hope. "No," she replied, shaking her head gently. "We all did. I just poured the first cup." David reached across and squeezed her hand. "You didn't just serve a meal, Lucy. You served dignity, and that's something the world's always hungry for." Outside, snowflakes danced under the streetlights like glitter from the sky. Inside, the heat hummed steadily, but it was something else that warmed the room now. Lucy stood to close up, flipping the sign to "Closed," then lingering for a moment as she stared out at the quiet town. She thought of that napkin note in her wallet, and all the lives touched by that one moment she almost overlooked. Sometimes it only takes a plate of food, one choice, one moment, one heart, to change a life, or maybe the world. If this story resonates with you, hit the like button and leave your story in the comment section. And of course, subscribe to my channel for more real, raw, and ridiculous stories. Till then, stay safe and happy.